Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Moses the Fugitive, Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 25. Exodus 2:11 starts off, now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up, and we need to stop and think about what that meant, growing up in the court of Pharaoh. Acts chapter 7 verse 22 says that Moses was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians, that he was a man of power in words and in deeds. Here was someone who had the best education in the world. He'd been raised thinking and doing and writing, and he's going to be qualified to write what we call the Pentateuch, the Torah. And of course God's going to lead him, but God's going to use the learning that he already has. Now it came about in those days that Moses had grown up, and he went out to his brethren, and he looked on their hard labors. Hebrews chapter 11 speaks of this. We read in Hebrews 11:24, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Now what that sounds like, because the writer of Hebrews goes on after this to talk about Moses slaying the Egyptian, it sounds like Moses makes this decision as he decides, I'm not going to be affiliated with the Egyptians anymore. I'm going to cast in my lot with the Hebrews. And it's when he does this that he happens upon a great wrong taking place. Back to Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. He went out to his brethren and looked on their hard labors, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. Now it describes him as beating a Hebrew. That word for beating is the same word that we see back in Genesis chapter 4 when Cain strikes and he strikes down Abel. He's beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that, and when he saw there was no one around, and our translation says struck down, but it's the same word that's used earlier for beating. So if we're going to be consistent, we would say he saw an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, and here he struck the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. That is, he saw perhaps a murder on the verge of being committed. He steps in and he instead kills the Egyptian. Acts chapter 7 verse 25, in commenting on this, tells us that he supposed that his brethren understood that God was granting them deliverance through him. Moses had the idea that he was the promised deliverer, that God had placed him here in this situation, that he would deliver the Israelites. He had come to understand that, and he supposed that the Israelites would understand that, and they did not. They did not understand. Now this comes to light the next day, when he went out the next day, and behold, two Hebrews were fighting with each other, and he said to the offender, notice there was an offender, and then there was the other fellow. There was the antagonist, and then there was the one who wasn't antagonizing. And he said, why are you striking your companion? But he said, the offender said, who made you a prince or a judge over us? Now, that's striking because, excuse the pun, that's striking because Moses was a prince, of a sort at least, would eventually be a judge made by God. And so he asked, are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? And then Moses was afraid that surely the matter has become known. Well, when Pharaoh heard of this matter, and the fact that Pharaoh heard of the matter, the Pharaoh probably didn't hear of every single matter that ever took place within his kingdom, but he heard of this matter because of the significance of who had accomplished it, Moses, one who had been brought up by a princess of Egypt. He tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled down by the land of Midian. So he leaves Egypt, that area with the Nile running through it, and he goes to the east, past the Sinai, to the land of Midian, and he gets there, and there he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water, and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. So notice Moses had been ready to deliver an Israelite who was being struck down, And now he also, in this guise of protector, he steps in and helps these daughters of the priests of Midian. Well, when they had come to Reuel, their father, now we find out what his name is. We're going to hear another name later on, but Reuel, their father, he said, "Why have you come back so soon today?" And so they said, "Well, there was an Egyptian," because Moses looked like an Egyptian. He talked like an Egyptian. He was probably dressed like an Egyptian. They assumed he was an Egyptian. I'm not sure if they even knew what an Israelite was. An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and what is more, he even drew the water for us and watered the flock. And so Reuel says what any father with 7 daughters says, "Well, where is he? Why is it that you've left the man behind? Invite him to have something to eat." And Moses was willing to dwell with the man, and he gave him his daughter Zipporah to Moses. And so Moses marries Zipporah, and then she gave birth to a son and named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been a ger." That's what the word sojourner means, or what the word ger means. It means sojourner. "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." Now, there's a contrast here that I think we can see, contrast and comparison, with Moses versus Jesus. In Moses, we have the story about how a foreign king had tried to put him to death. We saw that in the last chapter, along with all the other Hebrew male children. We saw that Jesus, in his case, a foreign king, Herod the Great, had tried to have him put to death, along with all the other male children in Bethlehem. In the case of Moses, he was the son of Hebrews, but had been adopted by the daughter of the Pharaoh. Jesus, likewise, was the son of God, but was raised up as the adopted son of Joseph. In the case of Moses, he came to a point where he determined to be identified with the people of God. And Jesus identified himself with all those who come and trust in him. In the case of Moses, he murdered an Egyptian taskmaster in an attempt to defend an Israelite. In the case of Jesus, he gave his own life, not just for the Jews, but for all the world, for you and me as well. In the case of Moses, he became a sojourner in a foreign land. Jesus left heaven to tabernacle with us and be a sojourner among us. Verse 23, "Now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died, and the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice on them." They cry out to God, and God remembers. The last time we read about something like that was back when the flood had taken place, and they had found refuge in the ark, and the waters had come, and 40 days and 40 nights, and then 150 days the waters had prevailed. And then God remembered them in the ark. Likewise now, God remembers them, and he is going to send Moses to deliver them from Egypt. But we'll see the rest of that story next time.